The morning I found a strange car in my driveway was the morning I understood that some people do not ask for permission because they have already decided the answer does not matter. I walked through my own front door and smelled someone else's cooking in my kitchen. There were shoes by my fireplace that did not belong to me. There were voices coming from the back bedroom, the room I had painted with my own hands 17 years ago, and none of those voices were mine. I stood in my own hallway and felt like an intruder in the house I had paid for, maintained, and kept alive through 30 years of early mornings and long nights. And the worst part, the part that sat in my chest like a stone, was that my son already knew. He had known for 4 days. He just had not bothered to tell me. I want you to stop for a second before this story goes any further. I want you to think about something real. If someone you loved, someone you had given everything to, allowed another person to walk into your home without your knowledge or your permission, what would your first move be? Not your second, not after you had calmed down, your very first move. Hold that thought, because Marcus Reid had a first move too, and it was not what anyone in that family expected. Marcus Reid was 61 years old when this happened, and he wants you to understand something before anything else. He was not a bitter man. He was not the kind of father who kept score or held grudges or made every family dinner feel like a courtroom. He had spent the better part of his adult life doing the opposite of that. He had bent himself into shapes that were not natural for him, smoothed over things that should have been said out loud, and carried burdens that were never meant to be his alone. He had done it because he loved his son and because he believed, the way a man believes in something he has never actually tested, that love was enough. That loyalty was enough. That showing up was enough. He believed that for a very long time. His name is Marcus Reid. He is a retired civil engineer who spent 31 years designing water systems for municipalities across the Southeast. He was good at his work, not famous for it, not rich from it in the way people imagine when they hear the word engineer, but comfortable, steady. The kind of man who knows how a house is built from the ground up because he spent years thinking about what holds things together underground. Bought his home in Claremont, Georgia in 1994, 3 bedrooms, a covered back porch, a yard with 2 pecan trees that dropped more nuts every fall than any one man could use. He had raised his son Damon in that house. He had sat with his late wife Patricia on that back porch for 22 years until she passed from a slow illness that took her piece by piece over 3.5 years. After she was gone, Marcus stayed in that house, because leaving felt like losing her a second time. Damon was 34 when all of this started. He was married to a woman named Renata who had come into Damon's life 6 years earlier with a sharp intelligence and a sharper sense of what she wanted. Marcus had tried to like Renata. He was honest enough with himself to admit that trying was the word. She was not warm toward him. She was not rude in ways that were obvious or easy to name. She was the kind of person who could make you feel dismissed without ever raising her voice. She had a way of looking past Marcus when he spoke, of repeating things he had already said as if she was the one who had thought of them, of rearranging conversations so that they ended with her point of view at the center. Marcus had chalked it up to personality, to the fact that they were just different kinds of people. He had told himself that what mattered was that Damon was happy, and for a while Damon had seemed happy, so Marcus had stayed quiet and kept his opinions folded up somewhere small. They lived 40 minutes away in a newer part of town, a neighborhood of beige houses with 2-car garages and homeowners association rules about holiday decorations. Marcus visited when he was invited, which was not as often as he would have liked. He called Damon every Sunday morning, a habit he had kept since Damon left for college 15 years ago. Sometimes Damon answered on the first ring. Sometimes Marcus left a voicemail. He never stopped calling. He was that kind of father. The trouble started with a phone call on a Thursday afternoon in October. Marcus was on his back porch, shelling the last of the season's pecans the way Patricia had taught him, when his phone buzzed on the table beside him. It was Damon. That was not unusual. The unusual part was the hour, because Damon almost never called in the middle of a weekday unless something was wrong. Marcus answered and heard his son's voice come through a little too fast, the way Damon's voice always moved when he was saying something he had already rehearsed, but still felt unsure about. Damon told him that Renata's parents were coming to visit from Savannah. He said they had not been up this way in a couple of years and that they were planning to stay for a stretch, maybe 3 weeks, maybe a little longer depending on how things went. He said their apartment was too small for house guests and that they had looked at hotels but the prices were really something, and then he paused in a way that told Marcus the real sentence was coming next. He said Renata thought it might be nice for her parents to stay at Marcus's place. She thought his house was a perfect fit, more space, a real yard, a quiet street, and she wanted them to arrive on Friday. It was Thursday afternoon. Friday was the next day. Marcus held the phone and looked at the 2 pecan trees in his yard. He listened to his son breathe on the other end. He thought about the back bedroom, the one he had painted himself, the one where Patricia's sewing chair still sat in the corner because he could not bring himself to move it. He thought about the kitchen where he had a system, a particular way things were arranged that made no sense to anyone else but made complete sense to him. He thought about his mornings, the quiet ones where he made coffee and sat at the table and read the paper in a silence that was not lonely so much as it was intentional. He thought about all of those things. And then he said, "Let me think about it and I will call you back tonight." What he did not say and what he wished later he had said was that this was not a request. It was an announcement dressed up in his son's voice to make it sound softer than it was. Renata had already decided. She had told her parents they were coming. She had made the arrangements in her head before Damon ever picked up the phone. Marcus understood that the moment the call ended, even if it took him a few more hours to say it plainly to himself. He called Damon back that evening and said he was not comfortable with the arrangement on this kind of notice. He said he had no issue with Renata's parents as people, had met them twice, thought they were decent enough, but that his home was his home and he would have appreciated being asked properly and given time to prepare and decide. He said he was sorry the timing did not work out, and that if they wanted to plan something with more notice, he was open to a conversation about it. Damon was quiet for a moment. Then he said that Renata was going to be really disappointed. Marcus said he understood that. Damon said that her parents were already expecting it. Marcus said that was not his responsibility to manage since no one had asked him before the expectations were set. There was another silence and then Damon said he would talk to Renata and they would figure something out. Marcus went to bed that night feeling like a man who had done the right thing, but was not sure it was going to feel that way for long. He was correct. The next 3 days were quiet in a way that was not peaceful. The Sunday call did not come. Marcus waited until noon, then until 2 in the afternoon, then until evening, and Damon did not call. Marcus did not call either, not because he was punishing anyone, but because he had made a reasonable decision in his own home and he was not going to perform guilt over it. He ate his Sunday dinner alone at the kitchen table and told himself it would pass. It passed in the sense that it stopped being a fresh wound and became instead a low, constant ache that sat just behind everything else. Damon called on the following Wednesday, not to talk through it, not to understand Marcus's side. He called to tell Marcus that Renata's parents had found a hotel and that it was expensive and that Renata was upset and that he just wanted Marcus to know what the situation had caused. Marcus listened to all of that without interrupting. When Damon finished, Marcus said he was sorry they were in a difficult position and that he meant that honestly, but that he had not created the difficult position. Someone else had created it by assuming without asking. Damon said Marcus was being rigid. Marcus said he was being a person who lived in his own house. The call ended without resolution. What Marcus did not know yet, what would not become clear until nearly 2 months later, was that there had been a group chat he was not part of. Damon and Renata's 2 sisters and her mother had a family thread on their phones where messages moved fast and free. And in that thread, after Marcus declined, after the hotel situation was sorted out, after Renata's parents made the drive and stayed 4 nights in a room that cost more than they wanted to spend, Renata had written something that got saved in a screenshot and eventually made its way to Marcus through a path no one had intended. What she wrote was this: "His house is just sitting there, it is basically storage for a dead woman's furniture, and he acts like. We are asking to move in permanently. He is selfish and he always has been, and Damon needs to start thinking about his own family instead of tiptoeing around a man who has nothing better to do than make things difficult." Marcus read those words on a Tuesday evening in December when his neighbor and old friend Lawrence, who had known Marcus since the mid-90s, showed up at the door with a look on his face that told Marcus this was not a casual visit. Lawrence had a daughter who was connected to someone connected to Renata's circle in that way that small cities always have, and the screenshot had moved through enough hands that Lawrence had found it and printed it because he thought Marcus deserved to know. Marcus sat at his kitchen table and read it twice. He did not cry. He was past the age and the place in himself where that happened easily, but something in his chest shifted in a way that was permanent. He read the part about the dead woman's furniture and he thought about Patricia's sewing chair in the back bedroom, and he thought about how Renata had sat in this house twice and eaten food Marcus had cooked and said the food was good and thanked him for having them. He thought about the word selfish, and he measured it against every Sunday call he had ever made, every birthday card, every time he had driven 40 minutes to help Damon with something around the house without being asked twice. He measured the word selfish against 31 years of showing up. Lawrence asked if he was all right. Marcus said yes and folded the paper and put it in the kitchen drawer where he kept the important things. He did not call Damon that night. He did not call anyone. He sat on the back porch even though it was December and the air was cold, and he looked at the pecan trees and thought about what kind of man he wanted to be going forward. Not in a dramatic way, not in a way that required noise, just quietly, honestly, without performance. He thought about what he was owed and what he had given and the distance between those 2 numbers. He thought about Patricia, who had told him once early in their marriage that the problem with being the dependable one is that people start depending on your silence too. He had not fully understood what she meant until now. He understood it now. Christmas came and Marcus was invited to Damon and Renata's house for dinner. He went. He brought food, a sweet potato pie and a pan of cornbread because that was who he was and he was not going to become someone else just because his feelings were hurt. Renata's parents were there, they were pleasant. Marcus was pleasant back. Nobody mentioned October. Nobody mentioned the hotel. Nobody mentioned the group chat or the screenshot or the phrase dead woman's furniture. Everything was wrapped in the kind of cheerfulness that families use when there is something underneath that nobody wants to name. Renata showed Marcus a room they had painted for a future nursery. She said they were thinking about starting a family in the new year. She said it with brightness in her voice and she touched Damon's arm when she said it and Damon looked proud and happy. Marcus said he was glad for them. He meant it. Whatever else was true, he meant that. He drove home that night and sat in his car in the driveway for a few minutes before he went inside. He looked at his house. The covered porch, the yard, the light he always left on by the front door because Patricia had believed in porch lights, said they told people someone lived there and cared about it. He looked at his house and understood that someone else saw it very differently than he did. That someone looked at this house and saw unused space, opportunity, storage. A problem that needed solving on their timeline with his cooperation assumed. That was when Marcus began to think carefully, not emotionally, carefully. He had a meeting scheduled in January with his estate planning attorney, a woman named Gloria Marsh who had handled Marcus's affairs since Patricia's passing. The meeting was routine, a review of beneficiary designations and the terms of his will. He had not been thinking about changing anything. He went to the meeting with the appointment already in his calendar, sat down across from Gloria in her office with the tall windows and told her what had happened. Not all of it, just the important parts. The phone call, the announcement dressed as a request, the group chat, the phrase dead woman's furniture. Gloria listened the way good attorneys listen, which is without reacting until they have the full picture. When Marcus finished, she asked him one question. She asked him what he wanted his home to mean going forward, not who he wanted to leave it to, what he wanted it to mean. Marcus thought about that. He thought about it longer than he usually thought about anything in a business meeting. Then he said he wanted it to mean something he had chosen, not something that had been as summed for him. Gloria nodded and pulled up his file. The conversation that followed was practical and clear. Marcus's will as it stood left the house to Damon as the sole beneficiary. That was the document as written. Marcus had other options. He could amend the will. He could establish a trust with conditions. He could also, Gloria explained carefully, make use of a life estate deed, which would allow Marcus to remain in and control the home completely for the rest of his life while naming a future beneficiary, or he could change the beneficiary entirely, or he could deed the property to a trust that carried specific terms about its use, occupancy, and any decisions about the property after his passing. None of these options had to be announced to anyone. They were his to make in his own time. Marcus asked Gloria about the trust option and what kinds of conditions could be written in. She explained that he could specify that the home must remain in the family rather than be sold for a fixed period, that any occupancy after his death had to meet certain conditions, or that the home could be directed to a charitable organization or other beneficiary if specific things occurred. She was careful to explain that the purpose was planning, not punishment. Marcus told her he understood the difference. He left her office with nothing finalized. He needed to think. He was a man who did not make large decisions in the middle of feelings. He drove home and made coffee and sat at the kitchen table and looked at the drawer where the folded screenshot was and thought for a long time. Meanwhile, life moved forward the way it does when the wound is not fresh anymore but the scar is still forming. Damon called on the Sunday after New Year's and the call was more like their old calls, easier, warmer, and Marcus was glad for it. He loved Damon, that was never the question. The question was whether love required him to hand over his peace, his privacy, his home, his name, his grief, his mournings, and his self-respect on someone else's schedule. He was learning, slowly and at 61 years old, that the answer was no. February came and with it came an unexpected conversation. Damon and Renata came over for dinner, one of those dinners that started with Marcus cooking and ended with everyone sitting too long at the table in that good, satisfied way. Renata was different that evening, softer somehow, and Marcus wondered if Damon had said something to her, or if she was simply in a better mood, or if she was building towards something. He kept his walls low enough to be polite, but high enough to notice. After dinner, while Damon was washing dishes in that way he had always done since he was a teenager, Renata sat across from Marcus at the kitchen table and said without much preamble that she wanted to apologize. She said she had thought about how the thing with her parents had been handled and that she knew the notice had been too short and that she should have spoken to him directly instead of going through Damon. She said she was sorry. Marcus looked at her and said thank you, he meant that too. What he did not say and what he thought about later was that she had apologized for the way it had been handled, not for what had been said in the group chat, not for dead woman's furniture, not for the word selfish or for the assumption that his home was basically storage. She had apologized for the logistics, for the short notice, for the channel of communication. Which meant she had either forgotten those other things, or she thought he did not know about them, or she had decided those things did not require an apology. Marcus was not sure which of those was most true, and he was not sure it mattered. He nodded and said he appreciated her saying so, and they moved back to easier conversation. And by the time Damon came out of the kitchen with clean hands and a dish towel over his shoulder, the moment had passed. But something else happened that February evening that Marcus stored carefully in the same drawer as the folded screenshot. While Renata was in the bathroom and Damon was still in the kitchen, Marcus had stepped into the hallway for a glass of water and he had passed the back bedroom and noticed that Renata had opened the door. She was not in there. She must have glanced in during her time in that part of the house. But the door was open and the sewing chair was visible from the hallway and Marcus stood for a moment and looked at it. He thought about what Renata had written. He thought about dead woman's furniture. He thought about how that chair was Patricia, not a symbol of Patricia, not a memory of Patricia. That chair was the closest living thing to her that Marcus had left. It was where she had sat every Sunday morning while Marcus read the paper, the two of them in the same room doing their own things in a comfort that did not require words. Marcus closed the bedroom door quietly and went to get his water. March arrived with warm weather and with news. Renata was pregnant. Damon called on a Saturday morning with a voice full of that specific joy that Marcus recognized as something he had only heard from his son a handful of times. Marcus felt the joy too, genuinely, without reservation. He said all the right things because they were also the true things. He was going to be a grandfather. That was real and it was good. The pregnancy changed the temperature in the family. Everyone was warmer, more focused, more pulled together by the thing that was coming. Marcus went to a dinner in April where Renata's parents were present and the conversation was easy and the food was good, and Marcus felt, for the first time in a while, that maybe the October business had simply been a moment and not a blueprint. He let himself relax into that thought. He should have been more careful with it. The second event, the one that made October look like a rehearsal, happened in May. Marcus had been away for 10 days visiting his brother in Mobile, Alabama. His brother Carl was 70, lived alone, had been having some health trouble, and Marcus had driven down to spend time with him and help him get some things sorted around his house. He had told Damon he was going. He had locked his house, set the timers on his lights, asked his neighbor Lawrence to keep an eye on the place the way neighbors do, and driven south with a bag packed for 10 days and a clear mind. He came back on a Saturday afternoon. He pulled into his driveway and noticed two cars parked there that were not his. He noticed a planter on his front porch that had not been there when he left, a large terracotta one with flowers already growing in it, arranged near the door in a way that suggested someone had placed it deliberately, like decoration. He noticed a child's bicycle leaning against the side of the house. He sat in his car for a moment and looked at all of these things. He went to the front door. His key still worked. He pushed the door open and the smell of someone else's cooking hit him immediately, something with a lot of garlic and onion, not bad, just not his. There were shoes by the door, adult shoes, 2 pairs, a smaller pair of children's sneakers. He heard a television from the living room. He heard voices from the kitchen. He stood in his own hallway with his travel bag on his shoulder and his car key still in his hand. And he counted to 5 inside his head the way he had taught himself to count in situations that required him not to say the first thing that came to him. Renata appeared from the kitchen doorway. She stopped when she saw him. There was a fraction of a second where her face showed surprise and then she smoothed it into something that wanted to look like welcome. She said, "Marcus, you're back early." He said no, he was back exactly when he had said he would be back. She said, oh, she must have gotten the dates mixed up. He said the dates were in the message he had sent Damon before he left. The same message where he had mentioned the house would be locked and the lights were on timers. He walked into his living room. Renata's parents were on his couch. Her mother was watching the television and her father was reading something on his phone. A child, who Marcus would learn was Renata's young nephew, was on the floor with a tablet. They all looked up. Her father started to stand. Marcus held up a hand gently and said, "Please don't get up." And he meant it calmly. He was not being hostile. He was simply managing the next 30 seconds so they did not become something worse than they needed to be. He put his bag down and looked at Renata. He said he needed a few minutes and then he would like to speak with her and Damon privately. She said Damon was at the grocery store and would be back soon. Marcus nodded and said he would wait. He went to his bedroom, closed the door, sat on the edge of his bed and called Lawrence. Lawrence told him that Renata had come by 2 days after Marcus left. She had a key, Lawrence said, and Marcus understood then that it was the spare key that had been under the mat for emergencies, a key Marcus had shown Damon the location of years ago for true emergencies. Lawrence said she had brought her parents and the child and they had been there since. Lawrence had been uncertain what to do, had not wanted to cause trouble, had almost called Marcus twice. Marcus thanked him and told him he had done nothing wrong. He sat on his bed for another minute. He thought about everything with the precision of a man who designs systems for a living, a man who knows that when something fails, it fails because a pressure was applied that the structure was not built to hold. He thought about October and the phone call and the announcement dressed as a request. He thought about the apology that was really only half an apology. He thought about the group chat and dead woman's furniture. He thought about the door of the back B room being open. He thought about 10 days in Mobile and a house that was supposed to be locked and a spare key that had been used without asking. He thought about all of those things and he saw them not as separate incidents but as a single line, a direction of travel, a pattern with a destination. Damon came back from the grocery store 20 minutes later. Marcus heard the front door, heard voices, waited another few minutes and then came out of his bedroom. Damon's face when he saw Marcus was a complicated thing. There was love in it and guilt and something that might have been relief if relief was mixed with dread. Marcus said, gently, let's talk outside. The two of them went to the back porch. Marcus left the door open so the air could move. He did not yell, he did not accuse. He asked Damon plainly and directly to explain what had happened. Damon explained it in the way people explain things when they know the explanation is not good enough. He said Renata's parents had needed somewhere to stay for a couple of weeks, that the same hotel situation was too expensive, that they knew Marcus was away and the house was empty, that Renata had said she would handle letting Marcus know and he had assumed she had. He said he should have checked. He said he knew that. Marcus asked Damon if he remembered October. Damon said yes. Marcus asked him if he remembered what Marcus had said then about his home being his home and about being asked properly. Damon said yes, he remembered. Marcus asked him what he thought had changed between October and now that made this acceptable. Damon was quiet for a while, then he said that nothing had changed and that it had been wrong and that he was sorry. Marcus looked at the pecan trees. He said he accepted the apology and that he meant that. He said that what happened next was the important part. He said that Renata's parents were welcome to finish the night and he would not make them feel unwanted in front of the child, but that by tomorrow morning he needed to know the plan for them to move to another arrangement. He said he would help with the hotel cost if that was truly the barrier. He would pay for 3 nights himself, because he was not a man who liked to see people in a difficult spot, but that his home was not available as a solution to the housing problem without his knowledge and his agreement. Damon nodded and said he would make it happen. Marcus went back inside and was polite to everyone for the rest of the evening. He made no scene. He asked the child what grade he was in and the boy said second and Marcus said second grade was a good year, one of the ones he remembered well from his own son. He sat in his own living room and watched the end of a program on his television and said good night at a reasonable hour and went to bed in his own room and stared at his ceiling for a while before he finally slept. The next morning, Renata came to talk to him before her parents were awake. She sat at the kitchen table while Marcus made coffee. She said she wanted to explain herself. Marcus said he was listening. She said that she had not thought he would mind, that the house was big enough for the visit, that she had planned to tell him and the timing had gotten away from her. She said she knew it looked bad. Marcus poured his coffee and sat down and said he would like to ask her something directly. She said of course. He said, did you use the spare key? She said yes. He said, did you ask Damon to check with him before doing so? She paused and said she had assumed Damon had told him. Marcus said Damon had assumed she had told him. She said she could see how that had created a problem. He looked at her for a moment without speaking. Then he said, Renata, I know about the group chat. He did not say anything else. He just let that sit between them. Her face moved through several things quickly. Surprise first, then a kind of calculation, then something that was either shame or the performance of it, and Marcus was not sure which. She asked what he meant. He said he thought she knew what he meant and he was not going to make her say it, but he wanted her to understand that he was aware that she had said things about his home and about Patricia that he did not agree with. He said he was not bringing it up to create a fight, and he was not going to raise his voice, and he was not going to tell Damon he had said any of this. He was telling her because she deserved to know that he knew, and because he wanted her to understand something important going forward. He said, this house is mine, everything in it is mine. Every chair, every memory, every morning, every decision about who comes and goes and when, I will be as generous as I can with all of that. But generosity is only real when it is chosen freely. When it is assumed, it stops being generosity and becomes something else entirely. Renata was quiet for a long time, then she said she understood. He said he hoped so. She said she was sorry, and this time her voice was different from February's apology, lower and slower, and he believed it more than the first one. He said thank you and got up to refill his coffee. Renata's parents left that afternoon. Marcus helped carry 2 of the bags to the car because that was who he was. He shook Renata's father's hand and told him he hoped the drive was easy. He meant it. Damon stayed an extra hour after his in-laws drove away. He and Marcus sat on the back porch with coffee, and for a while they did not talk about any of it. They talked about Carlin Mobile and how he was doing. They talked about the pregnancy and the nursery colors Renata had chosen. They talked about a baseball team they had followed together since Damon was a boy. And then at some point Damon said, quietly, without looking at Marcus directly, that he had not handled this well and that he knew it and that he was going to do better. Marcus said he appreciated hearing that. Damon said he loved his father. Marcus said he knew that and that he loved Damon too, and that love was exactly why they were going to be honest with each other from here on instead of assuming. Damon left around 4. Marcus ate dinner alone on the back porch, watching the yard go from afternoon gold to the soft gray of early evening. He felt something settle in him that had been unsettled since October, not because everything was fixed, nothing dramatic had been fixed, but because he had said the thing that needed saying clearly and without cruelty and the world had not ended. He had held his ground in his own home and the ceiling had not fallen. He was still standing. He was still himself. 3 weeks later, Marcus went back to Gloria Marsh's office. He sat down and told her he was ready to finalize some things. He did not change the will dramatically. Damon was still his son and still the primary person in his life, and the house was still going to be Damon's one day. But Marcus established a trust, with Gloria's help, that created specific protections. The house would pass to Damon upon Marcus's death under the condition that it remained a family home for a minimum of 7 years, meaning it could not be immediately sold or rented out or used as anything other than a primary or secondary family residence. If those conditions were not met within that window, the house would transfer to a historical preservation nonprofit that Marcus had long respected, which worked to maintain older homes in communities like his. There were other provisions, specific ones about occupancy rights and decision-making authority, all of which ensured that during Marcus's lifetime no one, not Damon, not Renata, not anyone else, had any legal right to make decisions about the home or who entered it without Marcus's full and documented consent. Gloria reviewed the documents with him carefully. She asked if he was sure. He said yes. She said it was a sensible and protective document, and she signed where needed and he signed where needed, and the papers were filed. He drove home with the documents in the passenger seat and felt, for the first time in many months, like a man who had taken something back that had always been his. Summer came, Renata's pregnancy moved into its final months, and the family gathered around that warmly. Marcus went to a baby shower in July where he was the only man, sat in Renata's sister's living room amid pink and yellow decorations, and ate cake and said kind things and meant them. Renata's mother hugged him when he arrived and said she was glad he was there. He said he was glad to be there. Damon called every Sunday. The calls were longer than they had been in recent years and warmer and more honest. Damon told Marcus things he had not told him before, feelings about the pressure of the pregnancy, worries about money, hopes that surprised Marcus with how specific they were. Marcus listened the way a father listens when he finally understands that his son needed him to listen more and advise less. He said useful things when he had them and held his quiet when he did not. One Sunday in August, Damon said something that Marcus replayed for days afterward. He said, "Dad, I think I owe you more of an apology than what I said on the porch. I think I let something happen that should not have happened, and I think I knew it and did it anyway because I did not want the argument. And I am sorry for that, not just for the thing, but for knowing and choosing wrong." Marcus said, "Son, I hear you, and I forgive you. What I need from you is not an apology forever. What I need is for you to understand that I am not a resource. I am your father, and there is a difference." Damon was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "I know, Dad. I think I am finally learning what that means." The baby was born in September, a girl, 7 pounds and 2 ounces, with Damon's eyes and a sound in her cry that made Marcus think of something very old and Reid knew at the same time. They named her Patricia, not after anyone was pressured or asked. Damon had told Renata he wanted to name their daughter after his mother, and Renata had agreed without hesitation, had said it was a beautiful name, and when Damon called Marcus to tell him the name he had chosen, Marcus had to set the phone down for a moment and look at his kitchen and breathe carefully, because that kind of feeling does not leave room for words right away. He went to the hospital that afternoon and held his granddaughter for the first time. She was small and warm and entirely unaware of every difficult thing that had happened in the 12 months before her arrival. He sat in a chair by the window with her in his arms, and Damon and Renata watched from the bed, and the room was full of a quiet that was completely different from the quiet of grief. This was the quiet of arrival. Renata looked at Marcus holding her daughter and said, with a sincerity Marcus believed completely, that she was glad he was her daughter's grandfather. Marcus looked up and said he was glad too. He meant it without reservation. He drove home that evening and went straight to the back bedroom. He opened the door and looked at Patricia's sewing chair in the corner. He had thought about moving it many times over the years. He had never been able to. He sat down in it, which he had not done since she had been gone, because sitting in it had always felt like doing something that was not his to do. He sat in it now. It held him the way it had always held her. He put his hands on the armrests and looked at the room and thought about his wife, not with the sharp grief that had defined the first years of her absence, but with a tenderness that had survived everything, the pain and the silence and the difficulty and the year that had just passed, and was still present and still real. He sat in the chair for a while. The house was quiet around him in the way that his house had always been quiet, not empty, but full of the things he had chosen and cared for and made his own over 30 years. He was still here. Everything he had built was still here. And now there was a new Patricia in the world, small and beginning, carrying a name that meant something in this family in a way that could not be reduced or assumed or taken. Marcus stayed in the chair until the light in the room changed. Then he got up, turned off the light, and went to make himself some dinner. The months that followed were not perfect. No family's months are. There were small tensions and misunderstandings, the kind that come with a new baby and tired parents and grandparents finding their place in a changed family structure. Renata asked Marcus once in November if the nursery that was now a baby's room could be moved to a larger room in the house, and Marcus said, gently, that his house had rooms as they were and he was happy to have baby Patricia visit whenever they liked, but that he would not be rearranging his home's layout. Renata accepted that without a fight. It was a small thing. But it was a different kind of small thing than it would have been a year ago, because this time she accepted it as his answer and did not look for another door to go through. Damon noticed, not everything, not the legal trust which Marcus had not shared with him, but he noticed that his father was different, not colder, not harder. Different in the way that comes when a person stops explaining themselves to people who have not asked sincerely and starts simply being who they are without apology. In December, Damon visited alone, without Renata, just for a Saturday afternoon. They sat on the back porch with blankets across their laps because the December chill was real now. They ate the last of the season's pecan pie that Marcus had made. Damon looked at the trees for a while and said he remembered climbing those trees as a kid, said he had climbed too high once and been too scared to come down, and Marcus had stood below and talked him down. Step by step, not rushing, not making him feel stupid for being afraid. He said he had thought about that a lot recently. Marcus said he remembered it. He said Damon had been 9 years old and that the trick with climbing down from somewhere high was the same as the trick with most hard things, which was to move 1 foot at a time and not look at how far down you were, just at where your foot was going to land. Damon said that was good advice. Marcus said it was something his own father had told him once, a man who had been gone for 20 years, and that he had thought about him more this year than he had in a while. They sat there until the light was fully gone and the cold got serious, and then they went inside and Marcus put the kettle on. There was no group chat. There was no spare key under the mat anymore. There was a new lock and a new key that Marcus kept on a hook by his door, and if the time ever came to share it with someone, he would share it himself in his own time, in his own way, with his own clear and chosen words. The house was his, the memories in it were his, the mornings were his, the pecan trees were his. The chair in the back bedroom was his, and it had always been his, and it would remain his until he decided otherwise. Marcus Reid was 61 years old, and he had learned something late but not too late. He had learned that a man who never says no is not generous. He is simply a man who has not yet understood the value of what he is giving away. And once you understand the value, the no does not feel like cruelty. It feels like finally telling the truth. He made 2 cups of tea that evening and sat with his son at the kitchen table where his late wife's recipes were still tucked in the drawer beside the folded screenshot he had never thrown away. He kept it because it reminded him not of what Renata had said, but of the moment he had decided to stop pretending it had not been said. That decision, quiet as it was, had been the beginning of something real. The tea was good, the kitchen was warm. Outside, the December wind moved through the pecan trees the way it had moved through them every December for 30 years. Marcus listened to it and felt, without drama and without performance, entirely at home. Marcus Reid never made a speech. He never sent a message to the group chat. He never exposed anyone publicly or made his family the subject of drama. What he did was simpler and harder than any of that. He decided what his home meant to him, what his mornings were worth, what his name deserved, and he acted from that understanding with quiet and with purpose. So here is the question I want to leave you with, and I hope you will share your answer in the comments because I think about this a lot. Has there ever been a moment in your own life where someone assumed access to something that was yours, your time, your home, your energy, your sacrifice, and you let it pass in silence? And if you could go back to that moment, what would you do differently? Marcus Reid finally answered that question for himself. What is your answer?